Welcome back to Animal Crossing New Horizons. I'm dear darling, as you see what's going on on our lovely island of Fawnhallow today. A rather late episode. I was busy for most of this evening. So I don't really know what we're going to talk about today, to be perfectly honest. Which is sort of relaxing, sort of vibing, having a good time, probably, maybe, question mark. I don't know. I'm just trying to think of a conversation topic. There wasn't much else I did over the weekend, so there's not really like the rest of that we can continue. But providing on when Isabel loads in, will be just before midnight, and just before no, literally at midnight apparently. Good evening, everyone. I'm here with a late night broadcast. I hope I can make it through this. Right now in Fawnhallow, it's 12 a.m. on. It should be Tuesday, July 9th, 2024. Yeah, I don't know what did I talk about. Yesterday, I suppose, a D&D session. It was, yeah, I recorded before the D&D session. Yeah, okay, yeah, I did. Because I was just like, oh yeah, you know, I was going to prep, but I was just like, there's not really a lot to prep. Everything's just like kind of laid out already. I don't know exactly what the group is going to do, so it's just going to sort of like well, we're just going to have to see what it goes and see how well I can not improvise exactly what's going on, because the story sort of set place, and how well I can sort of like recollect and bring up what is happening where and who and what. So it was a very intense, I think, session. It was definitely a weird session because it started off so strange. Like, I don't want to say like too much about it, but basically the first like hour or something of a session was one of my players basically removing his legs, I guess, is the best way I can put that, which you might be like, what? And I promise you it's probably a bit less weird than it sounds. I'm not going to give away too much that sort of thing, but like, this person does have like removable legs, kind of, but like it was just bizarre. Because I like, from a DM perspective, basically these characters were in disguise because they would be recognized, and they were like, okay, they're trying to collect something without being recognized. In my mind, I will pull back the curtain here for DMing Vale. In my mind, they were just going to walk in and they were just going to ask for it, because they were already in disguise, mind you. Like they spent like one of the last things they did last session was actually like get into disguises. In my mind, they were just going to walk into the inn and they were basically just going to collect the thing that they were going to collect there, what they needed, because it's sort of like at least in my mind, basically the news of them being hunted was like super like last minute. Like it was like basically announced only that day, and most people aren't really that familiar with them in the first place because they're not from that town. So you know, like only people who have like frequent interactions might even recognize them, or which person the person they were connecting with as innkeeper didn't really, at least the person who it was intended for basically has never interacted with this person before, so it's like, okay. Yeah, but they basically decided for no I shouldn't say like that, like I'd like to clarify, I'm not like accusing them or anything, because it was really, really funny from my perspective. But for the first hour, they spent like deciding like how to not how to remove the legs, but whether to remove the character's legs or not, and going just like without his like shin part, or like without his thighs. No, without his like the shin part of his legs. And as a DM, you know, I said it to them like afterwards. I was like, as a DM, you try to sort of fine line of deciding, you know, when's it an appropriate time for you to step in? Maybe because you want to step in and be like, hey, that's not something you can do. I don't want you going down this false path with a pretense that you've built up in your mind, or stepping in and being like, hey, I think you might have forgotten about this thing, or hey, this is something your character would probably know. And then sometimes you got to just like take a step back and just be like, you know, let them do whatever the heck they're planning on doing it. Let them do it, and we'll just sort of see how it goes. Yeah, and this was very much one of the cases where it was, but basically the way I could describe it was, you know, characters being like, I wonder if I could remove my legs, and of course me, DM did adding someone, okay, sure, you can. I would say blah 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 blah. In my head, I was like, okay, where is this going? And then it just like, as I hear a plan, I was like, you know what, go for it. Let's just see what happens as this goes on. So it was very, very silly, I would suppose, because I've also introduced an NPC character, like player character, to their party, which to sort of like I'm not sort of shake up is the right word, but to help sort of like round out, I think, their party dynamic. And one of the things about it is that she is incredibly, like, just overwhelmingly nice. Like, I think I described it before when I talked about, like, a Minnesota accent, which I can't do very well. Minnesota. Oh, geez, for sure. I've known him for years, is the trigger phrase I always try and use. It's something which I saw in, like, a Howcast video or something. Oh, but she's just so nice, and she's so kind and patient, and etc. etc. She's basically Minnesota nice. But she has no idea what was going on about them removing the legs, and it was just like such a strange situation. So it really felt like not too much was happening in like the first like half or something of a session, because like the first like hour or something was like removing legs and retrieving the item, and the next like half an hour was like trying to sort of infiltrate like this building, etc, etc. But then it like really started like kick off into high gear when I was like, okay, well, you put all these pieces into place, now it's time for the dominoes to fall, and see how it happens. And some very good rolls, I suppose, on their side afterwards gave way to a whole bevy, I suppose, of interesting, I suppose, revelations where, you know, things are going to kick off. Like, I thought it was absolutely going down in next session, then maybe. It was sort of just like a bombshell drop, and now it's like, oh man, this is like really going crazy. But it's exciting. But yeah, I mean, it happens, like, as a DM, sometimes you just sort of sit back and be like, okay, well, some things, like, you're willing to improvise, I suppose, on the fly DM. Like, again, to pull the curtain back, sometimes I have ideas of where NPCs are, and then like I'll shift them around depending on where they're going, because I'm like, okay, it also makes sense for this NPC to be here, time passes, etc, etc. Not everything is immediately set in stone. Like, I don't go into a session being like, this is exactly what's going to happen, I'm not going to like budge at all. If players come up with something more creative, or if I'm like, oh, that's like a really good idea, that would make, or I'm like, oh, they came up with something that 100% makes sense, that would have happened, then yeah, I would change my plans around to sort of like mold it. But a lot of the times as well, to try and sort of be true to it, like I don't bend the rules in a way which I don't think makes sense, I guess. So like, if I'm like in my mind like, oh, this character's going to be here and here and here, because that like, makes sense, I'm not necessarily going to like hugely shift and way just to make them run into the player characters, if they're like something which is set in stone, because if they miss them, then it's like, okay, well, that's just like a choice they made. Maybe they can think about it, and maybe they can come to that deduction. Sometimes it might have just been luck, or like maybe it only makes sense for them to find them in that location, because otherwise, like, what's the point? Because maybe it's meant to give a hint to something. I don't know. So there's a lot of times where you sort of try and remain true to that. Like, I don't want to ever come to a feeling where I'm just like, oh, yeah, and like we're not doing improv necessarily. I'm not yes-anding them. You know, it's not pivotal that things go exactly as they intended or as they planned. So for that to happen, you got to sort of like remain true to yourself of like how the story goes in your head, right? So there's a lot of times where you just sort of like sit back and just like watch what happens. Like, there's another time, like from the other session, the other campaign, which is perhaps a better illustrative example, where they were basically sneaking through the sewers. But the town they're in, the sewers sort of like connect a lot of the places, because it was something that was historically used, essentially, because above ground was reasonably dangerous, and most of the people there were not fighters. A little bit of lore drop for you, which they did find out because they did ask about it. But yes, what was I going to say? Yeah, they were sneaking around those sewers, and they basically wanted to sneak and infiltrate this building. The building being like the town hall, essentially, because they wanted to look for clues. It was like, in my mind, like I was hearing a plan and being like, okay, this is a bit strange, because it is like they're trying to infiltrate, because basically they did it like a couple of sessions, like 5 sessions or something before they did it, and they did it in the most dramatic way possible. Like, they wanted to be kind of stealthy, and then it just all went to heck, and then they just basically broken entered very, very loudly. So they're like, okay, let's like stealth in and all that this time. But the crazy part was, at least in my mind, them listening to the plan, how we're going to stealth in, how we're going to do things, I was sort of just like, okay, like, in my mind, I was like, this place we're trying to sneak into is literally a public building, like a town hall. Like, I mean, looking at Animal Crossing, it's open at midnight. Not saying all town halls are, but this one is like, it's open pretty late because it's literally like a public building. If there's any grievances in the town, they need to be able to go there. So it was like in the evening, like 8 p.m. or something. So I was just like, in my mind, they were coming up with a plan, and I was just like, I'm not really sure why they're doing this. They can just walk into the building. None of them questioned at any point because they, to be fair, to give them some leniency, they thought it would have been closed or something at this point, but none of them wanted. I don't know. I guess they didn't bother to check or or didn't think about checking. But very much just sort of like, here's a plan. Let's immediately go in and disregard the entire plan they just made. So like most of the session was spent like sneaking into the town hall, and then they basically got stuck, and then like the person who is their ally in the town hall had to like release them, and they're just like, and the NPC was just like, "What are you doing?" It's moments like that which is very funny. Like sometimes you step in, like if you don't want them to go completely down the wrong path. I can't think of a good example off the top of my head because it doesn't really evolve into much more of a plot point, but you certainly step in and be like, oh yeah, this, like, your character would know that this would be unfeasible, or your character would know this about the world, etc, etc. But sometimes, like in that case, you just sort of step back and be like, okay, we'll just see what happens, I guess. And it still makes for a very memorable moment, in my opinion. Just like this one with removing the legs. I think that's like raiding the ceiling manor and the removing of the legs. Those are like almost equivalent moments in each other's campaigns. But yeah, I don't know. Just sort of like letting things transpire. Like, I mean, me saying I imagine that's something which like parents must do a lot, you know. Like obviously when you raise a child, like, I don't mean to compare my friends to children. They're not children, of course, but certainly it does feel like wrangling children sometimes in when you're doing a D&D campaign, because of course it is. Like they're just like, oh, how many of these buttons can I push? And you, as the one rule bearer, I suppose, in the campaign has to be like, you can't push that button. That button does nothing, or something along those lines. You know, this is actually interesting because like I already done my Neopet dailies today. What if I did my Project Sakai dailies at the same time by playing this song, the challenge drive? So it's sort of like you're trying to wrangle people in, people about, and I'm sure as a parent, you know, a lot of the times you want to instill good like habits in your children, good teachings, good morals. Children are learning all the time, and you as a parent are like the eternal teacher, right? You have to be the one to be able to tell them like XYZ, this is how stuff works, and this is why things are the way they are, which I'm sure is not necessarily always the easiest thing to do, because I'm sure a lot of the time that you try and do it is you teach lesson like, they're like, oh, why can't I eat like 6 cookies for breakfast? And you're like, well, it's because cookies don't have nutritional value, etc, etc, etc. But I'm sure sometimes as a parent you just sort of sit there and be like, okay, you know, the kid's gonna learn some consequences for their actions, I suppose. Obviously not for like major things, but like if a kid is, I don't know, what would be like a good example or something, like trying to wash the back of a spoon, you just be like, okay, you know, this is not obviously going to harm the kid or something if they get splashed with a bit of water, unless they're allergic to water, in which case I don't know why you're allowing your kid to wash a spoon. By the time they force it on and it goes everywhere. Not the back, I guess, the front of a spoon, now I think about it. And then they get splashed and then they learn a lesson. They're like, oh, that's what that happens, and then you can step in or whatever. I guess that is the sort of comparison I'm trying to make. That sort of energy of just like, I'm just going to sit back and we'll just like let the consequences fall as they may. Except for the consequences instead of the kid learning like a life lesson or something, it's more like the players having a fun time. So really it's a kind of like a win-win situation. Obviously it's not something you want to happen all the time, because then I'm sure the players, I don't know if they would necessarily agree or not, but I'd imagine the players would probably start to get a bit frustrated, being like, okay, everything we do is like pointlessly a joke, it feels like, which I definitely don't want to give that impression or give that feel. So, you know, it's all about finding the nicest balance between things, allowing a bit of silliness, allowing a bit of chaos here and there, but also allowing consequences to be had. I think that's actually quite a difficult part of balancing a DM, is understanding like when to be lenient and when not to be lenient. the rules are there for a reason. I mean, at the end of the day, I suppose D&D is a tabletop game. It's got these mechanics, so you can't just let everything slide. If you want to let everything slide, you should just be playing like an improv roleplay or something instead. But by nature of D&D, it has like game mechanics surrounding it. So it is very much something where you have to like sort of put your foot down on things, or be like, okay, yeah, there will be consequences for this action, or like you know, etc., etc. But I think the hard part is because, of course, as a DM designing the world, you know all the solutions, you know exactly the inner workings of everything, and as a player, you don't. It's just like, and not every player, you know, necessarily cares, I suppose, to know everything that's going on. Like in my mind, like I think a thing you learn very quickly is just like, oh, in my mind I'm like, oh, if players want this information, they could start like asking about this information. They could like ask to investigate this, they could ask about this, they can like ask to like ask around town, try and find out this information. But a lot of the time, you know, most players don't operate like that. I guess it's kind of reflected on me, because now I think about it, if I was a player, that's probably how I would operate. I'd be like, you know, I wonder what this person's like, or, you know, this character. Can I ask around town to see, does anyone know this character who we're under suspicion, what they're like? Do they have like any sort of backstory to them? What can we figure out their motivation? That's probably how I play, but that's not really how most players necessarily play. And a lot of my players, and good, well, they certainly investigate, they don't necessarily investigate like that. You know, they're not gonna. I guess the greatest piece of advice I saw once is like, your players, it's not your players do not care about your world, but your players do not care about your world nearly as much as you do. Like in that sense, like does the ancient lore matter to them in your world? No, probably not. But does it matter to you? Maybe. I mean, I don't even have like ancient lore or anything like that, but it's sort of just like understanding like how to present the opportunities for information to be learned, you know. And as it turns out, just sort of asking around, just saying like, hey, can I ask around town for this? It's probably not all that engaging, to be perfectly honest. So definitely not for everyone. But it's also, yeah. At times you also got to be like, okay, you know, even if you don't know necessarily the consequences or motivations behind things, characters still have motivations nonetheless, which you can figure out or you might not. I think it's actually going to be not certainly a common thing, but a thing here and there where some of these villains which they're fighting against, I have like motivations behind for them, like why they're doing things. But if the players don't care about it, never see the light of day. And it doesn't have to. But let villains just be villains. They're evil, you know, through their actions. Does it have to be justified? No. Does it have to be motivated? Not necessarily. Does that make it any less engaging? Of course not. Just understanding, I suppose, that balance between it. It's just kind of like a backup card. If any of them are just like, oh, hey, like, why is this person doing this? Then I can just sort of like whip it out and be like, well, you see, because of X, Y, Z, which is either good or either bad. I don't know. It's up to you to decide. So just sort of like letting consequences happen, I guess, is kind of like the big old moral I'm like trying to instill here. Let the chips fall as they may, as they say. And it's just sort of like a, how do we fall? I don't know. It's interesting to see. Anyway, on that note, I'm going to round this episode off here, I think. So if you have been watching, thank you very much. It's been Animal Crossing New Horizons. I've been Dear Darling. Likes, comments, subscription, shares, greatly appreciated. Socials, Discord down below. Hope to see each other again, but for now, it's our farewell. So until next time, bye-bye for now.